Bill 195, I refer to it today as a more appropriate title would be the Death of Democracy Act.
Sure, please.
Yep. The Death of Democracy Act. You know, and, well, maybe you're here more often, you'd see that. The Reopening Ontario Act, as stated by the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, states it said illegitimate purpose and seriously flawed. There is no need for this bill. And that's what I want to get into during this discussion is why? Why this bill? And that's, of the 5 W's, there is no W more important than the question why. Right? Because the government has authorities. It has a majority government. It can make any and utilize any authority that is lawfully allowed to do through the legislative process in this chamber. It's always had that authority. What this bill does is limits this Legislative Assembly's ability to scrutinize and examine what is going on in the decision-making process of certain orders that are included in Bill 195. Right? That's important. Why? Why does the government not want us to know what they are doing with those specific orders? Right? And, Speaker, I'm going to say I have grave concerns the way the state of emergency was continually extended. I raised those concerns in this House. And I was concerned about what would come after the state of emergency. Bill 195 is what comes after the state of emergency. And I've said in this House that it appears that this government has become addicted to this newfound authorities, this authority without accountability. And Bill 195 takes that further. And I'm going to say, when I look at what this government has done and what they are doing and what has happened over the last 4 months, I come to this conclusion. The harm that happened in long-term care, the many tragic deaths that happened in long-term care, we don't know who made the decisions on those government policies. We don't know why those decisions were made, but we do know that those decisions contributed to and amplified the tragedy in long-term care. The government is shielding itself. Bill 195 puts more and more distance between the decisions and our ability to find the facts, the ability for us to have the evidence revealed. Bill 195 extends this period out to a year or greater. Why? Why is the government doing this? They do not want to see those decisions and those policies scrutinized by the members of this House or by the public or by the media anytime soon. And I'll refer members of this House. There's a really interesting research paper done by the Ontario Civil Liberties as well, the Ontario Civil Liberties Association, from a PhD scientist, Denis Rancourt. And it's a substantial document, and I've got the website, the link on my website. I would encourage people to look at his analysis of what happened in long-term care with COVID-19. And he uses this, and he goes into the medical side of this, and I think this is important for everybody to understand, because we had such a significant number of deaths in long-term care. He uses the term that we accelerated the death of those people in long-term care. Our government policies actually accelerated the death and the tragedy in long-term care. And there was a whole bunch. Many people will maybe have forgotten some of these policies, but these policies of not allowing residents to leave, the policy not of allowing the family physicians, the OMA, to create assessment centers, the policy that prevented many residents of long-term care from being admitted into hospitals. There's a whole bundle of these policies that have escaped scrutiny, and he goes on to point these out. And I think it's good for all of us to understand this. You know, you're elderly, you have chronic illness or multiple illnesses, you're in a long-term care facility, your immune system is diminished, and the government comes out and says, we're in a pandemic. You're already in a compromised position. We're in a pandemic, and you are not allowed to see anybody. They raised the fears of so many people. And Mr. Rancourt, in his research, does a very good job of illustrating that we scared a lot of these people to death. We actually scared them to death in a literal fashion.
I'm sorry to interrupt the member. Member from Carleton, I think will withdraw.
Withdraw.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt the member. Please continue.
You know, so I do encourage people to read some of these analysis of what's happened. But at the end of the day, that's where I see Bill 195, is keeping this information as far removed from the public domain as can be done. Okay? We'll keep extending emergency orders, keep people preoccupied, keep people thinking about this other puppy in the window with Bill 195, and keep people from looking into the past, prevent people from looking into the past. One of the things that was interesting when I was going through this document, because Mr. Rancourt goes through and looks at every American state, he looks at every Canadian province, he looks at all the European countries, and he uses his data, what's called all-cause mortality data. And he got that data from every Western jurisdiction, but Ontario won't release the data. He can't do that specific analysis in Ontario because this government does not release the data. And, you know, again, why? You know, every American state, go through it, every American state, the UK, Scotland, Wales, Germany, Italy, all of these countries release all the data. And you can have an independent analysis. And I'm left to conclude, Speaker, that, you know, Bill 195 is not a power grab as such. I don't think so. But it is certainly harmful to democracy. It is an affront to democracy. Democracy cannot function if there is not accountability. If there is not transparency, you do not have a democracy. The attributes and the characteristics of this government as it goes through its mandate are getting worse and worse. They are becoming more egregious, more brazen in their disregard for this House, for the public, for accountability, for fairness. And I said earlier, Speaker, you know, I used to sit on that side of the House, and I thought of my colleagues as champions of accountability. I thought of them as vigorous defenders of transparency. I thought of them as colleagues in arms of justice. And I say to them all, what have you become? When democracy doesn't look so good, and it doesn't, look up in the morning and look in the mirror, and you'll be able to say, I don't have to go looking for the culprit. He's there. Thank you.
Why he feels that a committee for emergency response for COVID is not a suitable parliamentary matter.
Thank you.
The all-party committee that I proposed in its legislature adopted through that motion, has enacted, had no limitations on its function and its use. The select committee that has been established by motion 84 or 85, or whichever motion, has very defined limits on its questioning of who it can question, and very short time frames on who it can question, and has no ability to compel that person. It says the Premier may show up. It doesn't say the Premier shall, and, you know, so there's no ability to compel any actual result out of that committee.
Thank you.
Thank you. I was intrigued by your why they're doing this. Could you expand on that a bit?
In a minute, I'm not going to be able to expand on too much more. But as I mentioned in the debate, there was all these policies that came through, and if you remember, the policies were going as fast and as furious, and every day there was more policies, and there was so much that you forgot what happened yesterday by the time today came around. And that's why none of these policies got suitable scrutiny. One of them is the memo that was issued by the Belleville Hospital to all the long-term care facilities in the Quinte area that said, if you have a resident who is exhibiting signs of COVID, we will not admit them to hospital. Okay? That meant you will die in place. And at the same time as telling those people that there was such a fear that was overwhelming us, and they couldn't see anybody, and then they were told they were being denied medical treatment as well.
So I listened intently to the members' comments, and aside from the fact that accusing our government of bringing about the death of democracy is not only an insult to every single person like myself who fled from an undemocratic regime to come to Canada and belittles the experience that we had dealing with an actual undemocratic society. What I'd like to ask the member is, you know, when he speaks about the death of democracy and he's being so dramatic, how does he speak to, or what's his response to the fact that in Ontario we've had less than 3,000 deaths, whereas just south of the border we've had over 138,000 deaths. So my question to the member is, how do you square that with your allegations that we're not doing a good job as government?
Well, generally when I make a comparison, I try to compare apples with apples and not apples with oranges. The population in the United States is over 350 million people. The population here is 14 million people. So if you want to be critical, at least come up with some good, substantial, and relative facts.